Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods, no grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, a bonus episode about running, community, and finding a way to make a difference. As we kick off Diabetes Awareness Month, I want to tell you a story about big goals, disappointment, and perseverance. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to a bonus episode of the show, and why not, to kick off Diabetes Awareness Month. Every week, we're here to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. My son was diagnosed with type 1 just before he turned 2. He is now going on almost 12 years living with type 1 diabetes. That was back in 2006. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting, in local radio and television, and that's how you get the podcast. And Diabetes Awareness Month, to me, is twofold. It's about celebrating within the community, sharing great stories, talking about the real deal with diabetes, which sometimes isn't so great, and that's okay. And really circling the wagons, to feel okay and feel connected with diabetes. But the other part for Diabetes Awareness Month is about educating the outside community. Let's take this month and tell your story to people, even if it's on your Facebook feed, who don't know much about diabetes. This is a great time to show them what we live with, to talk to them about what diabetes is and is not. And, you may not get tons of feedback, but if you educate a few people, it really can go a long way down the road. Part of the story I'm telling this week involves a running race happening this weekend. It's not specifically about diabetes. The race is not for or about T1D or anything like that. But the people involved that you're going to hear from, they have quite a diabetes story to tell. And stay tuned at the very end of this bonus episode for a bit of an announcement. I've been kind of hinting along for a couple of weeks that I've got something to say. I think this is the perfect time to tell you about it. But first, let me tell you about Tammy Lowry and her son, Jackson. Now, Tammy and I worked together for many years when I worked in local radio. I was on the air here in Charlotte at WBT Radio, which is a very well-known, what I would call a heritage radio station. And I did the morning show. It was a great place to work. One of my dream jobs, really. I love radio. I love doing that job. I hated getting up at 2:30 in the morning. The show was from 5 to 9 a.m. And it was a grind. It was really hard work, especially my daughter was 1 when I got that job, and I had Benny a couple of years later. So I was just never sleeping. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I left after more than a decade there. But Tammy was one of the incredible account executives at our sister station at 107.9 The Link. And Tammy worked her way up, local sales manager, national sales manager. I think she did both of those at the same time, actually. She was always working. Just one of these incredible people. And along with a few other, especially women in that sales department, always made me feel appreciated. These are not your typical slick salespeople. I've got to say, and no bashing the guys if you're listening, really we're privileged to work with a terrific staff over there for a very long time. And that's where I worked when Benny was diagnosed. And boy, did they rally around me. When I came back, what do you need? How can we help? They were fundraising and they were listening. And, it was really a remarkable place to be. So when her son Jackson was diagnosed in the summer of 2015, I had to reach out. I was no longer at the radio station at that point, but I remember, sitting in the Target parking lot, not far from where I live, and getting a text from a mutual friend of ours telling me, and just, every diagnosis stinks to hear about. But for some reason, that one hit me pretty hard. I just remember crying in my car and texting her, do you need anything? And they were in that hospital, that horrible, drinking from a fire hose learning curve. And he was okay. Wasn't in DKA. It wasn't that kind of terrible situation. But, I was so happy to reach out and talk to her over the next couple of weeks and months. I'm going to let Tammy tell you more of the story. But the reason I wanted her and Jackson to come on is not because they're doing great with diabetes. I mean, he's 14 now. They have challenges just like everybody else. He's a very active kid, plays soccer very seriously. And as you hear, he is now running. In fact, the year he was diagnosed, just a couple of weeks after he was diagnosed, his mom was supposed to run in the Charlotte Half Marathon, the race that is coming up this weekend. And she'll tell the story. That is how they got involved with the Charlotte Half Marathon. Now, the Charlotte Half Marathon is a benefit for the Isabella Santos Foundation. Isabella Santos Foundation is very well known around here, and it is expanding to your neck of the woods most likely. And it is a foundation for rare pediatric cancers. In 2007, Isabella Santos was diagnosed with a rare form of childhood cancer, and it is very low survival rate. It's less than 40%. But she kept fighting. She kept beating it for almost 5 years. Much of Charlotte rallied around her, but Isabella died in 2012. Her parents established the Isabella Santos Foundation. They actually established it in 2009, before she died, to help raise awareness and research funds. And they were really hoping to save her life. But now they're hoping to save other kids' lives. And that's how Tammy and Jackson got involved. And their link became a rather unique one. And Tammy will tell you more about that. This episode, I gotta tell you, was supposed to be called the T1D Marathon Kid. When I talked to Tammy and Jackson a few weeks ago, they were planning on running the Rock and Roll Marathon in Savannah, Georgia. Now, that is a huge goal for a kid, let alone a kid with type 1. But shortly after our interview, Tammy heard back from the registration there and found out that Jackson couldn't run it. Most marathons require that you be 18. Some will allow 16 with parental permission, but as I said, Jackson is only 14, so no go right now. After some soul searching, they decided they would both run the Charlotte Half Marathon, so he's been training. And I thought about it, and I thought about editing the interview a little differently or maybe redoing it, but I decided against that. I have no doubt that if Jackson continues to want to run a marathon, he will do so. So I thought it would be great to listen to their story. So here is my interview, first with Tammy, and you'll hear a little bit from Jackson later on. Tammy, thanks so much for talking to me. I got to tell you, sometimes when you know somebody, it's harder to do the interview. So I'm actually a little nervous talking to you today. Thank you for coming on.
Nervous at all. This is quite an honor. Thank you for thinking of us and including us.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you because your story is really inspiring, and I can't wait to hear what Jackson has to say. But let's just start with the basics. What do you remember about when he was diagnosed? I mean, it's funny. I remember where I was when I heard that your son had type 1 diabetes. I was in the Target parking lot looking at my phone, and I was I was so sad to hear it. But so tell me what happened.
Yeah. So, I was very in tune with, seeing him. He's always been athletic, and all of a sudden I realized that he was drinking a lot. When all throughout the day, if we, would go out to dinner, I would sit here and he would order what we call an adult drink. He's not a kid anymore. And he would, by the time they would come, if we were ordering dinner or something, they would come around and say, would you like an appetizer? He would have had that entire drink completely consumed. And I thought, the first week I noticed it, I kind of brushed it off and thought, well, he's just athletic. He's really thirsty, oh, this is crazy. I'm just thinking too much of it. But the second week that it continued on, he had a fear of going to the doctor. And so he never really told me when things were out of the norm for him. And I happened to be up late one night and realized I was folding laundry and putting laundry away and realized that he completely got out of bed from being asleep for a couple of hours and went and used the restroom. So that next morning I asked him at breakfast, I noticed you got up in the middle of the night and used the restroom. Was that just once? Was it just kind of one of those things that that happened and, everything okay? And that's when he actually opened up to me and had told me the last couple of weeks he was just really thirsty at school. He would go to the water fountain and drink after every single class. He would use the restroom after every single class, that he just could not get enough. And that's when it actually raised a red flag to me. And I thought, something's wrong. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if I should be really concerned or if it was something as simple as a bladder infection. But what I did know is I needed to get him in with his pediatrician. So I called his pediatrician's office, and they didn't have an opening for 2 days. So I waited because I wanted to actually see her and not necessarily go to a physician's assistant, because I trusted her and thought she would get to the bottom of whatever might be going on. And I started to do some research and knew somebody at a pediatric endocrinology office that was a friend of a friend. I talked to her one evening, and, she kind of warned me, this sounds like it could be diabetes. I don't know for sure, but when you go to your pediatrician's appointment, which was the next morning, just beware that if this really is type 1 diabetes, you're going to be admitted to the hospital. And I just didn't understand why. Why would he be admitted to the hospital? Why was this so serious? This can't be happening to me. And lo and behold, we go to his pediatrician's office. He literally, through a urine sample, was diagnosed on the spot. And we had a really good cry with our pediatrician. And off we went to the hospital I think we were there for about 48 hours. And it was a new lifestyle for us.
When your friend said to you, if it is type 1, you're going to be at the hospital, and you said, that doesn't really sound right. What went through your head at that time, before you saw the pediatrician? Did you ever think it could happen?
No, not at all. I thought type 1 diabetes was a hereditary thing. Nobody in my family had type 1, so this couldn't be happening to us. And then I think the other thought that went through my head was, well, just give him a pill, I was so naive and didn't understand why anybody would need to be hospitalized with the diagnosis. Now I completely understand, because it is a very serious disease and it can be controlled, but it could get serious pretty quickly if you don't pay attention to it. So, I just was naive about all of it. I didn't understand how type 1 diabetes actually worked.
Well, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's such a huge change and such a big education when you get that diagnosis. What was Jackson
Absolutely.
like? I mean, he was 11 years old. It was, very different from when my son was diagnosed and couldn't even say diabetes. Jackson he's so active. He's always been into activities. He's, even at that age, he was an award-winning athlete. Was he worried about sports?
He was worried about a lot. And, I look back on it and I feel awful. I feel awful for anybody who's going through it, because it almost forces you to mature and grow up pretty quickly, and especially at the age that he was diagnosed. So here he was 11 years old, almost 12, and had started middle school in 6th grade. And he was just a couple of months into that school year, and here he had to grow up pretty quickly and figure it out on his own, and yet he was old enough to handle it on his own. That's exactly how his dad and I handled it with him in the hospital. We said, you're old enough, you're bright enough to understand the importance of this, so we're not going to leave the hospital until you understand how to administer your own injections. And ever since, we have not given him a shot since that onset. He has managed all of it on his own. But it does get tricky with his athletic ability and everything that he plays. He's a very big soccer player, and then has also taken on running recently in the last year and a half, 2 years. And it can be difficult to manage it along with being athletic in sports. It takes a little bit of a different mindset versus your daily management of diabetes.
Before we go on to the athletics, because, man, I do want to talk about that.
Sure.
I'm just stuck on the idea of 11 years old. And I know it's not uncommon. I met a bunch of kids who do this, and they just blow me away that they are, okay, I got this. I'm going to do this. I don't need you to give me a shot. Whereas the challenge for us was growing up and trying to give him more independence, right? And it's like, he's enough pushing me away. Enough, Mom. I don't need you to do this anymore. You guys started out that way. What was that like to see your 11-year-old step up to the plate and say, yeah, Mom, I will give myself this shot? You have to have been so proud of him.
I was very proud of him. I mean, absolutely. And yet kind of sad from a parenting side, too, because he was forced to grow up a lot faster. there were absolutely moments, and still are, where he will break down and go, why do I have this? Why was I given and dealt this hand of cards, and I sit there and I think, he's making something of it, though, because he now understands how it is to battle a disease. And so he has embraced it from a totally different perspective than I ever thought he would. And I look at it now from a different perspective. Of course, I'm so proud of him that he now understands how it is to give back to people who are fighting other diseases and even diabetes. And he has gone out and helped raise money for organizations, just as much for JDRF as other organizations, because he doesn't ever want to see somebody, go through really kind of what he's going through.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you all is because Jackson is raising money for other causes. And one of the things he's doing, and man, this marathon situation is just incredible. Before we talk about his training, tell me a little bit about how you all got involved with the Isabella Santos Foundation. Which is a children's cancer foundation, put very simply. How did you all get involved in that to begin with?
So I had a bunch of mutual friends who became a part of the Isabella Santos Foundation Dream Team, which is a running group. And they all trained together in order to run a half marathon or a marathon or any other race that was, on the horizon for them. I actually joined that summer for the first time in 2015, and I was slotted to run a half marathon with them. But right when Jackson was diagnosed, about 3 or 4 weeks before the race is when he was diagnosed, I had to end up pulling out of that half marathon race because when, as we all know, the people who have that onset of type 1 diabetes, it's almost like you have a newborn child in your house. You're required to get up and check their blood sugar at midnight and 3 a.m. And I remember talking to you, Stacey, about it and being in tears and just sleep deprived and trying to get into a new norm that I just could not even function in running that half marathon that year. Well, long story short, Erin Santos, who is the mother of Isabella Santos and who runs and owns the organization that she has, turned to me and said, "Hey, I absolutely forgot to register for the half marathon. Could I buy your race bib off of you?" And I said, "Well, you don't need to buy the race bib off of me. I'll give it to you. I'd rather it go to good use than worry about, those details." So I gave her my race bib. She ran the race in Charlotte, the half marathon. And that morning, she wrote on her arm, Isabella on one arm, and she wrote Jackson on the other. And I showed it to Jackson and said, it gives me chills to this day. I'm like, it has nothing to do about Jackson. It has nothing to do about my son. Her organization has everything to do about Isabella and fighting pediatric cancer. And I think once that kind of soaked into Jackson's mind and brain, he just said, "Mom, I want to give back." That was very honorable that she did that, and she honored me. And so if you run next year, why can't I come and run with you? And so he came to a group run that we had. We have him on every Saturday morning through our training. And he was the youngest one. It was all adults. And I asked them, I said, is there a problem? Could maybe Jackson, at this point he was 12 years old, and I said, could he come run with us? And he struggled through that first run. We had a 5-mile run that day. He walked half the time and ran half the time and was really kind of spent at the end of that group run. But he came back to me and he said, "This was so much fun. I now understand how you can be motivated by running with a group of people, and I want to do this." So he did. He trained at the age of 12. He was the youngest, what we call the Isabella Santos Foundation Dream Team member, and he trained and he ran a half marathon that year. He has been a part of the Dream Team ever since, and last year beat his time in a half marathon. I mean, I think he beat his time, maybe shaved 20 minutes off of
my
it.
God.
It was insane. I think he ran the half marathon in 1 hour and 40 minutes or something like that. It was just insane. But he raised so much awareness and funds, and he ended up winning an award through ISF and got up and spoke in front of 600 people one day and talked about his experience, along with some pretty famous people that were at the Coffee for Cures too. It's just been a humbling experience. It's almost like when you are dealt something that is a challenge, you would try to make the most of it. And I think this is exactly, why he was dealt this hand. He's making something of it, and I could not be more proud of him.
I have some more questions for you about managing marathon running, but let me talk to Jackson first, and then will you come back on?
Sure. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Great.
All right, hang on one second.
Jumping back in here to say that when we put Jackson on the phone, we had some technical issues and we had some 14-year-old boy communication issues. It can be hard sometimes to do interviews with that age group. So I decided to edit the interview so you'll hear Jackson explaining things in his own words. Now, this is only about 2 minutes, but I think after you hear it, you'll get to know Jackson and you'll know what's in his heart. He starts out by talking about why he wants to run a marathon.
I just completed my second half marathon, and then I just decided to go bigger. I've been loving the training since. Yes, I just wanted to see what I could do next. If I can accomplish a half, then see if I can do a full. I play soccer for my high school and a club team, and I run with the Isabella Santos Foundation. I've ran 2 half marathons and a bunch of other races. I feel alive, and I'm just doing things that not many other kids have done at this age. They both went really well. The first one I was just going for time, just to finish, and the second one I was trying to finish in a certain goal. I'm running a full marathon, and I need a lot of training for it. And I want to be one of the very few who have done it with type 1. Just the fact that not many kids have done them, and I just want to be in that very small list. I eat peanut butter toast before the run. I eat sugar throughout the run to keep my blood sugar up. Because my mom got me into it a couple years ago, and it's a lot better to run with a group than it is by yourself. I learned that it's good to give back, and more kids should do it, more people should do it all around. Because I wanted to accomplish something big, and I've raised over $6,000 for JDRF, and I've raised $2,000 for ISF. I think it's great to raise money for diseases, and I think more people should do it. Yes, I try to inspire kids to raise money for certain fundraisers and to go out and do something like the Isabella Santos Dream Team. I will not let anything stop me from following my dreams.
Yeah, nothing's going to stop this kid. I did have a few more questions for Tammy, so we'll go back to her. And I started with her concerns about marathon training and T1D. Now, Jackson did mention that his dad was a little concerned, which I can understand. When he said he was going to run a marathon, what did you think about with the diabetes? You had to have been concerned.
I am concerned because even when he was training for the 2 half marathons that he has accomplished already, there have been some long training runs leading up to it where he has had, I guess, what you would consider and call a diabetic attack. And he would lose all energy, halfway through the run. It just happened to us 2 weekends ago. He was supposed to run 12 miles, and 3.5 miles in, he turned and looked at me and just looked completely drained and spent. And, it is concerning. It is definitely something for the marathon that I'm going to make sure I do a lot of research and how to continue to fuel your body, because even for somebody who's not a type 1 diabetic and is running a full marathon, they do the exact same thing. They fuel their body, every couple of miles and make sure that they're hydrated for energy purposes. And so it is even that much more concerning when you have somebody doing this and they're diabetic. So I'm actually in the process of doing some more extensive research now on how to manage that for him.
Yeah, he's so active already. I mean, with soccer, 5 days a week and then running and training. How have you, I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing, does he go low overnight, or have you really found ways, is it, to give him like a protein snack at night? Do you mind sharing how you keep him from going low all the time? I'm just thinking of all that exercise in the heat.
Right. And, it's kind of tricky also right now too, because he's going through a growth spurt, and that's even trickier on top of everything else that's on our plate from an athletic side. So he, I would say very rarely goes low, probably because he's going through puberty all at the same time. But we do monitor it. I mean, he just checks his blood sugar probably more often than he typically, would. And he does eat a snack at night in order to make sure, that his blood sugar is in line. He has a snack. He's not, really low. So we just try to keep an eye on all of that.
I'm curious too, have you gotten any pushback from the diabetes community? I certainly hope you haven't, about helping a different charity. I'm trying to think if this is the first time I think I've talked to somebody, and I know people fundraise all the time for other things, but this is the first time that we've really shared that kind of situation. I'm curious if anybody's given you kind of a raised eyebrow.
No. I have gotten nothing negative, which I am happy about, because I think if anything, the way we have positioned this is more, look, he knows how it is to fight something. And yes, it may not be, cancer, which is what he is actually raising money for pediatric cancer, but his heart is just a heart of gold. He has raised a lot of money for JDRF. We actually were very blessed that once he was diagnosed in 6th grade, his 7th and 8th grade years, his beta club at his school picked JDRF as their fundraising mechanism for the beta club. And he was their top fundraiser for JDRF at his school both years in a row. So it's not that we're ignoring JDRF at all. We think they are just phenomenal. And, we embrace that as much as we possibly can as well. It's just, he also knows here in the local community side, he can give back, just as much, and has met some phenomenal people to help any child who's diagnosed with something, and is fighting that. So we have actually fundraised from both perspectives, not just for JDRF, or not just for ISF. It's been both along.
I really admire it. I just think what you're doing is wonderful. And, when I saw that Jackson was doing this, it just, really touched my heart, which is, I feel kind of silly saying that, but it really did. And it's so fun to see how his school has gotten behind him, as you said, with JDRF, but it's also fun to see him with these local celebrities. What was it like meeting Greg Olson with the Panthers?
Oh my goodness. I mean, we were, it's Greg Olson. This is just phenomenal. And, it was just, I don't think we knew at the moment that it was going to be this rare occasion that, he would get up there, and he was speaking to a large group of people. We knew that. We were very prepared for that. But to have Greg Olson and his wife and, they're sitting, we were sitting at the table with them. He got a picture with them. He came up afterwards and took pictures with Jackson. And it was not long after that it was that actual event that Jackson was awarded the ISF annual award, and so Greg Olson saw all of that happen. It was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. We have his picture framed and hanging in his room right next to his award that he achieved. It was just like one of those, once in a lifetime experiences, I have to say. It was pretty neat.
That's wonderful. I'd love to know, it's only been a couple of years. I mean, we've got a long way to go. Jackson's a freshman in high school, right?
He is.
Wow. What do you think, looking back, could you imagine that when you brought him to the pediatrician and then to the hospital, that a couple of years later you'd be like hanging with Greg Olson and he's training for a marathon? That can't be what you thought was going to happen.
Not at all. And I think it is just one of those things that, I think I had mentioned this before, but it's almost like you're given lemons. What are you going to do? How are you going to make lemonade out of that? And I know that's such a crazy saying that everybody throws around in life for different instances, but it's so true, I feel like, in our case, because, we were dealt this challenge, that has affected our lives like everybody else who has type 1 diabetes, and it affects their life. Now, what are you going to do about it? You have two choices. You can embrace it and make the best of it and try to do something with it, or you can be, down about it the whole time, and we chose to try to embrace it. And, I look back at all these experiences, and I am just so glad that Jackson has embraced it from this angle, because he's not embarrassed. I mean, does he wish things were different? Of course. He wishes he didn't have it, but he will check his blood sugar in front of all of his friends. He'll take a shot in front of all his friends. He's not embarrassed at all. It's more like, hey, this is my life. If you're my friend, you're going to support me. And he's made something out of it through all of the things that he's doing to accomplish, fundraising and running and soccer and events that he's doing. It's pretty cool to watch your kid, at a young age do something like that.
I can't wait to see what he does next. I wish him all the best, and you as he's training here, and we'll be watching. Tammy, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Just very honored that you wanted to feature us. So thank you very much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
It was great to catch up with Tammy after working with her for so long. I hate that it was under those kinds of circumstances. I wish we were both talking about other fun stuff or just reminiscing about radio. But I'm glad she shared their story, and I'm thrilled that they let me share it even after it became clear that Jackson could not run the full marathon. Although, as I said, if he wants to do it, I know that's in his future. I'm going to link up to their fundraising page. Please don't feel obligated, but it has a great bunch of information. There's a lot more about the Isabella Santos Foundation, and there's a lot more about Tammy and about Jackson there as they continue to share their stories. If you are new to the show, I always like to invite you to please join our free Facebook group. It is called Diabetes Connections, the group, and you can always get there. There's a link in the show notes for every episode. All the information for every show is in those little show notes. You can get there by going to diabetes-connections.com or clicking on the little details or more information here on any podcast app. But I know a lot of you listen through social media, which is great. Just kind of hard to get the show notes that way. So if you do want the links or more info, please head over to the website or listen on any podcast app. Speaking of apps, I have a big announcement to make. And I'm purposefully putting it here at the end of this bonus episode because I know this is where the hardcore listeners are, right? If you're listening to the end of these episodes, I appreciate it so much. And so here's a little bit of a bonus for you. I will be announcing this officially on World Diabetes Day, coming up on November 14th, but you get to know right now. I am launching a brand new app. It is all about diabetes events. This is separate from the podcast. Now, over the years of doing the podcast, one of the big requests I get is, can you promote my event? Can I come on and talk about this? Can I give you this information and you can tell people about it? And I am happy to do so, but this is a pretty lousy medium for getting the word out about events. First of all, it's once a week. I don't tape it on the day it's released, right? It's not really a great community bulletin board for that kind of stuff. I wish I could get on the air every day and talk to the diabetes community, but that's just not practical. And I don't know about you, but Facebook events used to be really helpful. But the algorithm has changed so much, and a lot of people are leaving Facebook, that the event listings, especially within closed groups, just stink. I have a local group, and the whole reason I have this Charlotte parent group on Facebook is so we can find each other and we can get together in person. To me, in-person connection is so important. Last year, that group kicked over 500 people, which is fantastic. Except once you're over 500 people, Facebook will not let you invite the entire group to events. They consider it spamming the members. You can only invite your Facebook friends in the group. Well, that's no help. And Charlotte's a huge area, and we have 500 people. I'm not friends with all 500 people. So for the past year, we've really struggled with getting the word out about events. So those are just some of the reasons why I've created Club 1921. Club 1921, launching later this month, is a brand new app. It's going to be for the entire diabetes community, any type of diabetes, to connect you with events anywhere in the United States. Sorry for my international listeners. We are US only right now, although give me time. I would love to spread this out around the world. You'll be hearing a lot more information about this. I just wanted to let you know right now before we release it to the public. The official launch is going to be November 14th on World Diabetes Day. Please stay tuned in the Facebook group and the newsletter. If you're signed up for the newsletter or you're already in the Facebook group, that's the best way to stay tuned and get the first release when we're ready to have people start signing up. I'll let you guys know first. But, the podcast only comes out once a week or maybe twice a week sometimes with these bonus episodes. So the best way for me to get information to you quickly is through that Facebook group, number one, and definitely that newsletter as well. Yeah, Club 1921. I've been working on this for a long time. I'm a little nervous to launch my baby out into the world, but we will make it all official very, very soon. And I just wanted to let you be the first to know. And why Club 1921? You probably have guessed. That is the year that insulin was discovered. All right, back to our regular scheduled podcasts on Tuesday and then throughout the month of November. I'll be popping in here and there with more information about Club 1921, so please stay tuned for that and more. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.